Singapore. As Netflix expands rapidly in Southeast Asia, the company's commitment to artistic expression has been repeatedly tested by governments trying to control what their citizens watch and hear, according to former employees, industry watchers and rights advocates. Arrowright Netflix has honored at least a dozen government requests to remove titles from service, company reports, and is in middle of heated debate over how companies should be regulated. These challenges arise precisely as Netflix, which has lost subscribers in North America, is increasingly turning to Asia, and particularly the burgeoning economies of Southeast Asia, to accelerate growth. Since 2020, the company has opened offices in Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and has begun negotiations to enter Vietnam, where other major American tech companies have avoided placing staff due to security concerns. The streaming giant has also licensed hundreds of local movies and television shows in Southeast Asia and has ordered more than a dozen original content. Malabika Banerjee, Netflix's director content for Southeast Asia, said company sees a lot of untapped potential in the region's 686 million people who have been rapidly online over past decade. Other streaming companies agree. Amazon recently launched local versions of its Prime Video platform in 3 Southeast Asian countries, and Disney Plus announced its first attempts at original content in Southeast Asia November. Both companies said they comply with local regulations in all countries where they operate. Governments have welcomed foreign investment, even as they try to maintain control over content. More than half of the 18 titles Netflix has agreed block partially or completely from 2016 to 2021 have been requested by governments in Southeast Asia, according to the company. The Philippines has removed 2 parts of an Australian spy program because it showed maps of the South China Sea, which officials said violated Philippine sovereignty. With the most takedown requests of any country in the world, Singapore has removed content that appears to glorify drug use. In Indonesia, which routinely censors LGBTQ content, the Broadcasting Commission is pushing Parliament to oversee broadcasting companies. And in Vietnam, South Korean drama was cancelled after government said character playing war veteran had made statement about the Vietnam War that offended nation and its heroes. Vietnamese legislators recently mandated that streaming services obtain licenses and establish legal entities in the country to continue operating in the country. Netflix is working with academics advisors assess risks and opportunities in Vietnam. According to an expert interviewed, the company sought help late last year to determine what government considered offensive or inappropriate. This came as Netflix executives met with Ministry of Planning and Investment officials in Hanoi last December to explore the possibility of opening an office in the country. The company instead pointed to its annual reports announcing takedown requests. Last year, in an update to a memo setting out guidelines for company employees, Netflix said, "Artistic expression is one of its core values. Not everyone will like or agree with everything on our service," the note said, but Netflix doesn't believe in censoring certain artists or voices. A professional in the streaming industry familiar with Netflix's Southeast Asian operations said that while the company frequently turns down takedown requests, he believes it's better to comply than risk having his entire catalog blocked. The expert spoke on condition of anonymity, as they were not authorized by their organization to speak about Netflix. Elsewhere in the world, Netflix has at times resisted censorship. In 2020, the company successfully rejected Brazilian judge's request to remove satirical film depicting Jesus as gay man, filing complaint with the country's Supreme Court. The company has not filed similar legal objections in Southeast Asia. 3 former Netflix employees said the company's willingness to address political sensitivities in the region went beyond takedown requests and affected what content it commissioned or licensed, for example. All 3 are still working in streaming industry and have spoken out about the anonymity condition for fear of retaliation from company. Freedom House analyst Kian Vestinson said the wave of censorship that has hit social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube in recent years in Southeast Asia has now hit streaming companies. Vestinson said businesses like Netflix can have social impact, but only if they see their platforms, not just as channels of entertainment, but as spaces for free expression and access to information. In 2020, the country's largest telecommunications company Telkom Group lifted its 4-year ban on Netflix, shortly after Indonesia's education and culture minister announced a partnership with Netflix to support local film development. And now offers broadband packages that include Netflix subscriptions. But conservatives continue to call for censorship. President Agung Supriyo said that as Indonesian legislators debate a new streaming services law, the country's streaming commission has received many complaints that Netflix is showing content the country deems illegal. He gave the example of Rocco, a documentary about Italian pornography star Rocco Siffredi that was in Netflix's catalog until recently. Currently, Supriyo added that there is no standard for what is allowed on the platform. A spokesperson for the country's Infocom Media Development Authority said that in Singapore all streaming companies are subject to a content code. The spokesperson said, in cases where the content is not appropriate, MDA will request that it be taken down. In Vietnam, the government recently passed a law penalizing companies that provide movies online, companies that fail to submit a list of their movies. The Ministry of Culture. Vu Tu Ton, Vietnam country representative for the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, said fears of being dominated by foreign influence are mounting in Vietnam. When it comes to streaming, Ton said, what the industry calls content moderation, in the context of Vietnam should really be understood as content control. Still, companies facing dwindling subscriptions elsewhere are pressing to enter Vietnam. In March, weeks after the government threatened to block unincorporated streaming services in Vietnam again, Netflix executives joined a large delegation of U.S. companies to visit the country. The trip was led by U.S. ASEAN Business Council, which signed an agreement with the Vietnamese government in 2022 to improve business conditions for tech industry. Council Chairman Ted Osius said the deal is a meaningful framework that allows American tech companies, including Netflix, to influence how they're regulated, even as they make practical arrangements to operate in the country. Louis Boswell, CEO of the Asia Video Industry Association, a trade group that counts members of Netflix, Disney Plus and Amazon, said streaming companies acknowledge governments have certain concerns about content. He cited Thailand's notoriously harsh lèse majesté laws, which criminalized insulting members of the royal family. As an industry, we really don't want to get into a debate about whether we agree with this rule, he said, adding, I don't think most of our members are there to enforce them. The envelope on that. Instead, Boswell said streaming companies are trying to convince authorities in Southeast Asia that firms shouldn't be regulated like traditional broadcasters or social media platforms. Tools like parental controls and content recommendations on streaming sites allow users to self-regulate, making government censorship unnecessary. Garrett de VNCK San Francisco, Winda Charmala from Jakarta, and In Hung Nguyen Ho Chi Minh City contributed to this report.